Just the bookkeeper. That's what my brother said about me at his business launch party, right before he introduced me to his investors as someone he'd hired for a few months to get things off the ground. No one in that room knew I hadn't been paid a single dollar. No one knew I had been doing his books, his taxes, his financial projections, and his loan applications for 2.5 years. And no one knew that the $38,000 seed money that started his company came directly from my savings account. What none of them knew was this: everything in that room, the catered appetizers, the architectural models on the display tables, the lease on that downtown office space, existed because of money and labor I had quietly provided while my brother told everyone he built it alone. I learned a long time ago that being invisible in your own family feels like standing behind a two-way mirror. You can see everything, you can hear everything, but no one on the other side ever looks in your direction. The venue was a converted warehouse space in the Fulton Market District, the kind of place that costs $4,000 to rent for an evening and makes everything look like it was always meant to be there. My brother had good taste. He always had. Growing up, he had the instinct for presentation, how to enter a room, how to make people feel like they were in the presence of someone important. I had the instinct for the numbers behind the presentation, for what things actually cost, for how long money lasts when you're not careful with it. I arrived right at 7. My brother had told me to come at 6:30 to help with setup, then sent a text at 6:15 saying the event coordinator had everything covered and I should just come as a guest. I knew what that meant. He didn't want his investors watching his sister arrange cheese plates. He wanted me to appear as though I belonged in the crowd, not behind the scenes where I'd actually spent the last 2 years. The room was full by the time I got there. Architects from other firms, commercial developers, a few people from the city planning office, and a cluster of investors in the corner who looked like they were used to being the most important people in any room they entered. My brother stood at the center of it all wearing a suit I'd helped him pick out 3 months ago, laughing at something a silver-haired man in a blazer was saying. My mother was near the bar. She saw me come in and gave me a small wave, the kind that means I see you, but I'm busy, before turning back to her conversation with someone's wife. My father didn't look over at all. I got a glass of sparkling water and stood near one of the architectural models, a mixed-use development project my brother had been pitching to investors for 8 months. I had built the financial model for that project. I had run the pro forma, calculated the projected ROI, formatted the investor deck. My name appeared nowhere on any of it. My brother noticed me after about 15 minutes. He excused himself from the silver-haired man and walked over, and I could see before he even reached me that his expression wasn't warm. "You made it," he said. "You invited me." He glanced around the room, then back at me. "Try not to corner anyone tonight, okay? These people are here to talk business, not—" He paused, looking at my dress, a simple black shift I bought at a Banana Republic sale 2 years ago. "Just keep it light." I said I understood. He walked back to the silver-haired man. I stayed near the architectural model and thought about the wire transfer I'd made 48 months ago from my savings account to his business account. $38,000. Everything I had saved working as a freelance accountant since I was 22 years old. I had told myself it was temporary, that once the business was generating revenue he'd pay it back, that this was what family did. I told myself that for a long time. Later in the evening, one of the event coordinators tapped the microphone and my brother took the small raised platform near the windows. He talked about the company he built, the philosophy behind his design practice, the way he approached every project. He thanked his investors by name. He thanked 2 of his college professors. He thanked his parents. He did not mention me. I watched my parents from across the room while he spoke. My mother had her hand pressed to her chest, the way she does when she's proud. My father was nodding slowly with an expression I'd only ever seen him wear when my brother was involved. It wasn't hatred I felt standing there. It was something older and more familiar than that. It was the specific feeling of understanding, for the 1000th time, that you are not in the picture they're taking. You're the one holding the camera. I need to go back a little because what happened that night didn't start that night. It started about 15 years earlier in the kitchen of the house we grew up in a suburb of Columbus, Ohio, with a report card and a dinner table and a pattern that got set so early I spent years not even recognizing it as a pattern. My brother is 5 years older than me. He was always the one with the plan, the vision, the pitch. Even as a teenager, he could walk into a room and make people believe in whatever he was saying. My parents loved this about him, my father especially. He used to say my brother had the gift of presence. He never said what my gift was, and I never asked because I was pretty sure the answer would have been something like good with details or reliable, which are both things people say when they can't think of a compliment that actually matters. My brother struggled in school. Not badly enough to fail, but enough that my parents worried. Tutors, private SAT prep, a gap year that turned into 2. Meanwhile, I moved through school quietly, got straight A's, won a regional math competition in 9th grade, got a small scholarship to Ohio State. My parents came to my brother's high school soccer games, but missed my award ceremony because there was a scheduling conflict with one of his college visits. I found out from a voicemail my mother left afterward. She sounded genuinely sorry, which somehow made it worse. I studied accounting. I liked the clarity a bit, the way numbers told the truth even when people didn't. I graduated in 3.5 years, passed my CPA exam on the first attempt at 23, started taking freelance clients almost immediately. By 25, I had a small but steady roster, a few small businesses, a restaurant group, 2 real estate investors. I was good at my work. I lived carefully. I saved aggressively because I knew that money in a savings account was the only form of security that didn't require anyone else to notice you. My brother, at 30, was still figuring it out. He had a design degree from a school in Chicago and years of portfolio work, but had never stayed anywhere long enough to build towards something real. He had an idea for his own firm. He talked about it constantly at family dinners, how the industry was ready for someone who thought differently, how he had the contacts and the vision, how he just needed the right moment. What he needed, it turned out, was capital. My parents sat me down for what they called a family conversation. It was a Sunday afternoon, mid-January, and I remember the light in their living room was the flat grey kind that makes everything feel like a waiting room. My father did most of the talking. He laid it out practically, the way he always did, like he was presenting a business case rather than asking his younger child to fund the older one. The numbers, he said, weren't huge. My brother needed enough to cover his first year of operating costs, lease a small office, hire 1 staff member, cover his licensing fees and insurance. My parents could contribute some, but there was a gap. I want to be honest about what happened next because I've spent a lot of time trying to understand it. I didn't say yes because I was pressured exactly. I said yes because I had spent 25 years believing that if I just gave enough, contributed enough, sacrificed enough, my family would eventually look at me the way they looked at him. I knew that belief was probably not rational. I said yes anyway. The wire transfer went through on a Wednesday. My brother called that evening, which was unusual, and said thank you in a tone that suggested the subject was now closed. My mother texted me a heart emoji. My father didn't reach out at all. That was the last time the money was directly acknowledged. Over the next 2 years I worked inside my brother's company in every way that mattered, while being invisible in every way that was visible. I did his monthly bookkeeping. I reconciled his accounts. I filed his quarterly taxes, set up his payroll system, built his financial projections for investor pitches, reviewed his contracts for red flags. None of this was part of a formal arrangement. There was no retainer, no agreement, no paper trail that named me as anything other than a family member who helped out. My brother told people he had a great bookkeeper he brought in at the start, as though I were a contractor he'd found on Upwork and occasionally checked in with. Twice I heard him tell versions of this story in front of me, neither time acknowledging I was standing right there. My mother would call sometimes and mention how well the business was doing, how proud they all were, how he was really proving himself. Once she said, "He built this from nothing, you know. That's not easy." I was sitting in my car in a parking garage in the West Loop, running late for a client meeting, having just spent my lunch break filing his Q3 estimated taxes. I said I knew. There's a particular kind of silence that lives inside you when the people who were supposed to see you have decided at some fundamental level that you're not worth the attention. It's not loud, it doesn't announce itself. It just becomes part of the atmosphere, like a pressure difference. You stop noticing because you've adjusted to it so completely. I kept records. I want to be honest about this too. I wasn't building a case, at least not consciously. I kept records the way a person keeps a journal sometimes because you need proof that things happened, that you existed in them, that your memory of events is reliable. I had every bank statement showing the initial transfer. I had every email where my brother asked me to take a quick look at something that turned out to be a 40-hour project. I had the invoice drafts I made for him, the tax filings, the financial model for the Fulton Market development pitch, all of it saved in a folder on my laptop labeled with the company name and the year. I don't know exactly when I stopped expecting acknowledgement. Somewhere in the second year, I think. When you stop expecting it, you stop noticing its absence in real time, and you only feel it all at once later, usually at a moment when you're not prepared for the weight of it. The launch party was that moment. Standing near the architectural model after his speech, I made a decision. I wasn't going to make a scene. That wasn't what I wanted. What I wanted was to leave without him calling after me to make sure I hadn't said anything to anyone and to stop allowing the distance between what was true and what was being performed to exist inside me without being acknowledged anywhere. Even just privately, even just to myself. I picked up my coat from the rack near the door. I was going to walk out. I had almost made it. Leaving? My brother's voice from behind me, carrying just enough volume that the two investors standing nearby could hear. I turned around. He had the practiced smile he wore for clients, the one that communicated warmth while the eyes stayed measuring. "Early night," I said. He tilted his head slightly, the way he did when he wanted to seem generous in front of an audience. "She's modest," he said to the investors, though he was looking at me. "She did some bookkeeping for us in the early days, got us set up." He paused, finding something to land on, and then he found it. "Just the bookkeeper, right? But everyone needs someone like that." One of the investors laughed politely. My brother's smile didn't waver. I stood there for a moment with my coat in my hands. Just the bookkeeper. The person who had transferred $38,000 from her savings account, who had spent 2.5 years building every financial foundation the company stood on, who had filed the taxes and built the investor projections for the very pitch that brought the people in this room through the door. Just the bookkeeper. I said, "Good night," and turned back toward the door. That was when a woman's voice said, "Actually, I have a question." I turned. A woman in her mid-50s was stepping away from the investor cluster. Short silver hair, reading glasses hanging from a lanyard, the kind of unhurried energy that suggested she was used to asking whatever she wanted and waiting as long as it took to get an answer. I recognized her from the name cards near the bar. She was the principal of a commercial real estate development firm that had been in talks with my brother's company for 3 months. He had sent me her company's financial disclosures to review, back in October. She wasn't looking at my brother, she was looking at me. "I'm sorry," she said, and she said it to me, not to him. The Fulton Market pro forma, the financial model in the Q4 investor deck, I went through it in detail last week. Whoever built that model understood construction lending in a way that isn't common. She paused. "Was that you?" The room had gone quiet in the specific way. Rooms go quiet when no one wants to be the one who breaks it. My brother laughed, a sound that was meant to deflect. "That was a collaborative effort. I'm asking her," the woman said, still not looking at him. I looked at my brother. His jaw was tight and his smile had a quality now like a nail that's been hit wrong. Still in the wall but no longer sitting straight. He gave me a micro look, the kind that said answer carefully, say something that keeps this simple. I thought about the Sunday afternoon in my parents' living room with the flat grey light and my father's reasonable voice laying out a business case. I thought about the parking garage in the West Loop and my mother saying he built this from nothing. I thought about the word bookkeeper and the way he had said just before it, the way the word just is used to make something smaller without technically saying it's worthless. "Yes," I said. That was me. The room stayed quiet. The woman nodded slowly, like she had confirmed something she already suspected. The section on phase construction draws and interest reserve calculations, she said. The way it accounted for the lease-up period, that saved this deal from having a fatal flaw that would have cost someone a lot of money. She looked at my brother. Did you know that? My brother said something I didn't fully hear, something about team effort and division of expertise. The silver-haired man from earlier was watching. One of the other investors had put down his drink. The woman looked back at me. Do you have a card? I did not, technically, have a card with me. I had a phone with my contact information on it, which is what I gave her. She typed it into her own phone, thanked me in a way that felt like the end of one conversation and the beginning of another, and returned to her group. I put on my coat, said good night again to no one in particular, and walked out the door. My brother texted me before I reached my car. We need to talk about what just happened. I sat in the driver's seat for a while without responding. I thought about what had just happened. The woman had asked a direct question and I had answered it. That was all. I hadn't walked into the room with a plan. I hadn't calculated the moment, but I also hadn't said no, said something vague, said, "Let's not get into it," which was what I would have done 6 months ago, a year ago, for most of the last 2.5 years. My phone buzzed again. You undermined me in front of people I've been working to close for months. Then, I'm not trying to start something, I just need you to understand what's at stake here. I drove home, I made tea. I did not respond that night. The next few days were a specific kind of uncomfortable. My mother called twice, I let both go to voicemail. My father called once, which was unusual, and I answered because the unusualness of it made me afraid something was wrong. Nothing was wrong. He wanted to tell me in his careful, measured way that I had put my brother in a difficult position, that whatever I thought about the situation, the launch party hadn't been the right place, that we needed to be a family that supported each other. I said I understood. He said good. Neither of us said anything that felt like the actual conversation we were having. 3 days after the party, I got an email from the woman with the silver hair. Her name was Vera Callahan. She was the principal of Callahan Development Partners, a firm that had completed 11 mixed-use projects in the Chicago metro area in the past decade. The email was polite and direct. She had done some research on my background. She had a project in pre-development, needed a senior financial consultant with specific knowledge of construction lending, and she wanted to know if I had any availability. I sat with that email for a long time before I responded. The money I had given my brother had been, for 2.5 years, the largest financial decision I had ever made. Not because it was a bad investment in the technical sense. His company was doing well, the revenue was real, but because of what it had cost in the non-financial accounting, the kind where you track what you gave up and what you got back and whether the balance has any logic to it. I had given up my entire savings and 2 years of labour and the presumption that my family would eventually register what I had contributed. What I had gotten back was a title, just the bookkeeper, in a room full of people who had no reason to think otherwise. I responded to Vera's email on a Thursday afternoon. I said I had availability and I'd welcome a conversation. We met the following week at her office, a low-key suite on Wacker Drive that looked like a place where actual work happened rather than a place designed to impress people. She was direct from the first minute. She laid out the project, asked me specific questions about my methodology, and told me her previous financial consultant had retired and she hadn't found anyone since who could move between the construction finance and the investor relations side without losing precision on either end. I looked at the fall-to-market model again, she said. The risk-adjusted return analysis, that section is graduate-level work. I took a construction lending course through the Mortgage Bankers Association, I said, and I worked with a commercial real estate client for about 4 years before I started helping with my brother's company. She nodded. The model is clean. I've seen expensive consultants produce work with less rigor. She looked at me in the direct way she had. I want to understand something. Why wasn't your name on that work? I thought about how to answer that. It was a family arrangement, I said finally. It didn't occur to anyone to formalize it. She looked at me for a moment. It occurred to someone not to, she said. We finished the meeting. She offered me a consulting engagement at a rate that was almost 3 times what I'd been charging my existing clients. I told her I'd think about it. I already knew I would say yes. I was in the elevator going down before the knowledge fully settled in my chest. This was the first time in 2.5 years that someone had looked at my work and asked who made this, and when I told them, believed me without needing my brother in the room to confirm it. My brother called me 2 weeks after the party, after the initial texting had stopped. He had let enough time pass that he probably thought the urgency had cooled. He was right that it had. It had cooled into something quieter and more settled. I want to clear the air, he said. Okay. What happened at the launch? I know it wasn't ideal, but you have to understand I'm in the middle of a critical period with this company. I can't have things getting complicated in front of investors. I said I understood. I know I haven't been great about acknowledging your help. I'll do better about that. I said okay. So we're good? I waited a moment. I've been thinking about stepping back from the bookkeeping, I said. I'm taking on some new work and I won't have the bandwidth. Silence. Then, what does that mean? Stepping back? It means I won't be doing your books going forward. You should hire someone. There are good bookkeeping services, or you could bring on a staff accountant now that the revenue is there. Nora. He caught himself, started again, changed his tone. I rely on you for a lot of this. I can't just replace you overnight. I know. I'll transition everything through the end of the quarter. That gives you 6 weeks. Why are you doing this right now? Is this about the party? No, I said, which was true in the most technical sense. It wasn't about the party. The party was just where I happened to be standing when I finally got tired of holding something that didn't belong to me and started putting it down. I just have a new opportunity and I need to focus on it. He was quiet for a while. When he spoke again, his voice had shifted into something that might have been real, or might have been the version of real he performed when he needed something. I know I don't say it enough. I am grateful for what you've done. I know, I said. It wouldn't exist without you. I sat with that for a moment. It was the first time he had said anything close to that. It was true. It also arrived 2.5 years after it would have changed anything. Take care of yourself, I said, and I meant it in the plain, no complications sense of the phrase, the way you mean it when you're not angry at someone, but you've accepted that the relationship you were trying to build was built on different blueprints than the ones you were handed. I hung up. The transition took the 6 weeks I said it would. I documented everything thoroughly, as I always did, and handed the files to a bookkeeping firm my brother engaged in November. I completed my existing client work, took on a second project through Vera's firm, and by January I had more work than I'd had the previous year, at rates that reflected what I actually knew. I heard updates about my brother's company through the periphery. My mother mentioned it occasionally, more carefully now, less triumphant. The Fulton Market deal closed. He hired 2 more staff members. He was doing fine. My parents and I found our way to something that wasn't exactly different but was at least honest. I stopped waiting for them to acknowledge what had happened, and I stopped pretending it hadn't. We talked on Sundays sometimes. We disagreed about a few things in ways that were calm and specific, which felt like progress of a kind. My brother sent me a client referral 6 months after I stopped working for him, someone he knew who needed help with a complicated Section 1031 exchange. It was a professional gesture. Clean and transactional, which was probably the right register for us at that point. I took the client. I did good work. I sent my brother a brief thank you. What I've come to understand, slowly, the way you come to understand things that your body knew before your brain caught up, is that being useful to someone is not the same as being valued by them. I was useful to my family for a long time in ways that were real and significant and unacknowledged, and part of me believed, for longer than I liked to admit, that if I made myself useful enough, the acknowledgement would eventually come. That the ledger would balance itself. The ledger doesn't balance itself. You have to put down the weight yourself, even when no one offers to take it from you, even when you've been carrying it so long that the act of setting it down feels like letting someone fall. What I know now is that it isn't falling. It's just them learning to hold their own weight, which is something they should have been doing all along. The morning I signed my engagement agreement with Callahan Development Partners, I sat in my apartment with a cup of coffee and the contract on my kitchen table, and I thought about that warehouse in Fulton Market, the flat white light, the architectural models. My brother's voice saying just the bookkeeper as though the just were a fact of nature rather than a choice. I thought about Vera asking who built that model and the way she waited for the actual answer. I signed the contract. I sent it back. I finished my coffee. I wasn't waiting for anyone to see me anymore. I was too busy being seen. I've thought a lot about cause and effect since that night in Fulton Market. Not in a dramatic way, not like I'm sitting here believing the universe engineered a specific outcome on my behalf. It's simpler than that. What I've come to understand is that the choices people make, consistently, over time, without ever believing they'll be called to account for them, have a way of producing exactly the kind of moment my brother found himself in that evening. He made a pattern out of using what I built while erasing my name from it, and that pattern, compounded over 2.5 years, is what Vera walked straight into when she sat down with our investor deck the week before the party. She wasn't looking for anything. She was doing her due diligence, which is what careful, serious people do before they commit money to something. And what she found, the rigor in that financial model, the specificity in the construction lending analysis, didn't match the story she'd been told about how the company operated. That gap between the story and the evidence is what brought her to her feet when she saw me heading for the door. I didn't create that gap, my brother did. Every time he let someone believe he'd done something he hadn't, he made the gap a little wider. I think about that a lot when I feel tempted to believe that staying quiet is the safe choice. There's a version of intelligence that's really just pattern recognition, seeing what a situation actually is, not what it's being presented as. I had that intelligence all along. I applied it to financial models and investor projections without ever once applying it to what was happening inside my own family. I could see the risk in a flawed pro forma from 100 feet away. I could not see, or would not see, that I was continuously accepting terms that diminished me because some part of me believed that being needed was close enough to being valued. It wasn't. It never is. And the difference matters, because one of them requires you to keep making yourself smaller to maintain it, and the other one doesn't ask you to shrink at all. The resilience I'm most proud of isn't the 2.5 years I kept working without acknowledgement. That took endurance, which is its own thing, but endurance in the wrong direction is just a slow way of losing yourself. The resilience I'm proud of is the moment I said yes to Vera's question. Not to cause damage, not to settle a score, just because it was true and I was finally tired enough of the alternative to say it out loud. That's the kind of strength that doesn't require an audience. It just requires that you stop lying to yourself about what you're willing to accept. What I want for anyone who recognizes something of their own story in mine is this. Your work is not invisible because it lacks value. It's invisible because someone decided it was more convenient that way. Those are two completely different things, and understanding the difference is the first step toward building something that actually belongs to you. Vera saw my work for exactly what it was. She didn't need my brother to introduce her to it. It spoke clearly enough on its own. That's the thing about doing honest work with real rigor over time. It leaves a record. And records have a way of being found by people who know what they're looking at.